I used to think life was a checklist. Every box ticked meant a day less likely to fall apart. That belief lasted until the day my wife called me for the last time, and my entire life became one long series of unchecked boxes. The funny thing about planning is that it gives you the illusion of control, right up until the moment everything you planned for crumbles in your hands. My name is Dean Callix, and I'm a senior operations manager at Midwest Manufacturing Solutions. For 23 years, I've made my living creating contingency plans, backup systems, and fail-safes. At work, I'm the guy they call when the production line breaks down or when a client threatens to pull $1 million contract. I fix problems before they become disasters. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could engineer solutions for every possible industrial catastrophe, but couldn't see the collapse of my own marriage until it was too late. Or maybe I saw it coming and just refused to believe it. Either way, the signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to a house I didn't want to enter. Lana and I had been married for 18 years when the cracks started showing. She was a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital downtown, working the night shift 3 times a week. At least, that's what she told me. Looking back, I realize how convenient those night shifts were, how they gave her the perfect cover for activities I was too trusting to question. The first sign should have been her phone habits. Lana used to leave her phone lying around the house, screen up, notifications visible. Sometime around our 15th anniversary, that changed. The phone started going everywhere with her, to the bathroom, to the kitchen when she made coffee, even to the mailbox. When I mentioned it casually one evening, she laughed it off. "It's just work stuff, Dean. You know how Dr. Martinez is about responding to messages quickly." Dr. Martinez. I'd met him twice at hospital functions. A short, balding man in his 60s who seemed more interested in discussing golf handicaps than medical emergencies. The idea that he was sending urgent messages at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night seemed unlikely, but I let it slide. That was my first mistake. The second sign was the way she started dressing. Lana had always been attractive, but she'd settled into the comfortable routine of someone who'd been married for over a decade. Yoga pants and oversized sweaters at home, scrubs at work, jeans and blouses for social occasions. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed for attention. Then, gradually, things changed. New lingerie appeared in the laundry, expensive stuff from brands I didn't recognize. When I complimented her on a particularly nice set, she claimed it was a gift from her sister Jennifer for her birthday. Jennifer, who thought spending $50 on a restaurant meal was extravagant, supposedly bought Lana lingerie that cost more than most people's car payments. She said I deserved to feel beautiful, Lana explained, not meeting my eyes. I wanted to believe her. That's the thing about love. It makes you stupid in all the ways that matter. You ignore the evidence, because accepting it means accepting that your world is built on lies. The third sign was her sudden interest in fitness. Lana joined a gym across town, claiming the equipment was better than the community center near our house. She started going 3 times a week, always on the same days, always for exactly 2 hours. When I suggested we could work out together, she said she preferred the women-only classes. "It's more comfortable," she said. "You understand." I didn't, but I pretended to. That became my specialty, pretending to understand things that made no sense, accepting explanations that fell apart under the slightest scrutiny. I was so busy being the understanding husband that I forgot to be the observant one. The fourth sign was the way she started talking about my brother Hale. Hale worked for the same company I did, though in a different department. He was 2 years younger than me, never married, and had always been the charming one in the family. Where I was methodical and careful, Hale was spontaneous and charismatic. Women liked him. They always had. Lana had never shown much interest in Hale before. He was just Dean's brother, someone who showed up for holidays and family barbecues. But suddenly, she was asking about his work, his dating life, whether he was happy. She'd mention conversations they'd had that I wasn't aware of, reference inside jokes I didn't understand. "Hale is so funny," she'd say after hanging up the phone. "He was telling me about this client who wanted to paint their entire factory pink. Can you imagine?" I couldn't imagine Hale calling our house to chat with my wife about work stories, but again, I let it slide. Maybe they were just getting closer as family. Maybe I was reading too much into innocent friendliness. The fifth sign was the money. Small amounts at first, $20 here, $50 there. Cash withdrawals that didn't correspond to any obvious expenses. When I asked about them, Lana always had an explanation. Gas for her car, lunch with co-workers, a contribution to someone's baby shower. Reasonable explanations for unreasonable patterns. Then the amounts got larger. $100, $200. When I found a receipt for a cash withdrawal of $500, I finally asked direct questions. "What did you need $500 cash for?" "Jennifer's having financial trouble. I didn't want to embarrass her by writing a check." Jennifer, who worked as a paralegal at a downtown law firm and drove a car newer than ours, was supposedly having financial trouble. Jennifer, who had never asked for help with anything in the 15 years I'd known her, was suddenly borrowing significant amounts of cash from her cousin. That's when I started paying attention. Really paying attention. The way I did at work when a system was showing signs of failure. I began keeping track of the inconsistencies, the small lies that didn't add up to a coherent story. I started what I privately called my marriage audit. The results were damning. Lana's gym had no record of women-only classes on the days she claimed to attend them. I called, pretending to be interested in membership for my wife, and discovered that their women-only programs were on completely different days. The cash withdrawals followed a pattern. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork, always on Thursdays, always from the ATM near the interstate. The same ATM that happened to be 2 blocks from the Comfort Inn where, according to my casual investigation, rooms could be rented by the hour. Her phone records, which I accessed through our family plan, showed regular calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize. The calls were always on her supposed gym days, always lasting between 30 and 45 minutes. When I reverse searched the number, it came back to a prepaid cell phone with no registered owner, but the most damning evidence was the simplest. I started coming home at unexpected times, using different routes, parking down the street instead of in our driveway. On 3 separate occasions, I saw Hale's truck in our neighborhood when he had no reason to be there. Once, I saw him leaving our house while Lana's car was in the garage and she was supposed to be at work. The pieces fit together with the horrible precision of a well-engineered machine. My wife was having an affair with my brother, and they were using our house as their meeting place. The cash withdrawals were for hotel rooms when our house wasn't available. The phone calls were coordination. The gym membership was cover. I had been living in a carefully constructed lie for months, maybe years. The moment of absolute clarity came on a Thursday evening in October. I was supposed to be at a company dinner, a quarterly meeting with our biggest clients. At the last minute, the dinner was canceled. The client's CEO had a family emergency. Instead of calling Lana to let her know I'd be home early, I decided to surprise her. I pulled into our driveway at 7:30, expecting to find her getting ready for her night shift. Instead, I found Hale's truck parked behind our house, hidden from the street view. The lights in our bedroom were on, and I could hear voices through the window. I stood in my own driveway, listening to my wife and my brother in my bedroom, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The part of me that had been making excuses, finding reasonable explanations, hoping for the best, that part simply shut down. What replaced it was the same cold, analytical mind I used to solve problems at work. This was a problem that needed solving. I didn't storm into the house. I didn't confront them. I didn't even let them know I was there. Instead, I got back in my car and drove to the office. I sat in my empty workspace and began planning. The first thing I did was document everything. I wrote down dates, times, inconsistencies. I printed out phone records, bank statements, credit card bills. I created a timeline of Lana's lies and Hale's presence in places he shouldn't have been. I treated it like any other investigation, methodical and thorough. The second thing I did was research. I spent the weekend reading about divorce law in our state, about asset protection, about evidence gathering. I learned about private investigators, about surveillance equipment, about the legal requirements for proving adultery. The third thing I did was plan, not just for the divorce, but for everything that would come after. I wanted more than just legal victory. I wanted justice for the 18 years of trust they had betrayed. I wanted consequences that matched the magnitude of their deception. I spent the next 3 months gathering evidence. I hired a private investigator, a retired police detective named Murphy, who specialized in marital infidelity cases. Murphy was thorough, professional, and completely without sentiment about his work. 23 years I've been doing this, he told me during our first meeting. The details change, but the story's always the same. Someone you trust decides their wants matter more than your feelings. The only question is how much evidence you need to feel satisfied with the outcome. Murphy's surveillance confirmed what I already knew. Lana and Hale were meeting twice a week, sometimes at hotels, sometimes at our house when I was at work. They'd been careful, but not careful enough. Murphy had photographs, video recordings, documented timelines. He had enough evidence to prove adultery in any court in the country. But I wasn't planning to go to court. Not yet. The fourth thing I did was prepare for war. I moved money. Not illegally, nothing that would get me in trouble, but I shifted assets in ways that would protect them from division in a divorce. I transferred funds to accounts in my name only, paid off debts that were in both our names, made investments that would be harder to liquidate quickly. I changed beneficiaries on my life insurance policies, my retirement accounts, my investment portfolios. I updated my will. I made sure that if something happened to me, Lana wouldn't inherit anything more than the law absolutely required. I also began documenting our marriage in ways that would be useful later. I kept records of household expenses, of who paid for what, of the financial contributions each of us made to our shared life. I wanted to be able to prove that I had been the primary breadwinner, the one who made our lifestyle possible. Most importantly, I began planning my revenge against Hale. Hale worked in quality assurance, a department that required security clearance and absolute trustworthiness. His job involved inspecting products that would be used in government contracts, medical devices, aerospace components. Any hint of ethical problems would end his career permanently. I started documenting Hale's access to our house, his use of company time for personal activities, his violation of the family trust that had gotten him his job in the first place. I prepared a case that would destroy not just his current position, but his ability to work in our industry ever again. By January, I was ready. The trigger came from an unexpected source. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who lived next door and kept track of everything that happened on our street. "Dean," she said one morning as I was leaving for work, "it was very loud at your place yesterday afternoon. I heard screaming." I stopped, my hand on my car door. "What time yesterday?" "Around 2 o'clock. Sounded like someone was in distress. I almost called the police." "No one was home yesterday afternoon," I told her, which was true. I had been at work, and Lana was supposed to have been at the hospital for a day shift. Mrs. Patterson looked confused. "Well, there were definitely people there. I saw 2 cars in your driveway." I thanked her and drove to work, but I couldn't concentrate on anything. The idea that Lana and Hale were using our house for their affair was bad enough. The thought that they were being so careless, so disrespectful, that they were disturbing the neighbors made it worse. That evening, I made a decision. I was going to catch them in the act. The next morning, I followed my usual routine. I showered, dressed, made coffee, kissed Lana goodbye, and left for work at exactly 7:30. But instead of driving to the office, I circled the block and parked 3 streets away. I waited 20 minutes, then walked back to our house through the alley behind our property. I let myself in through the back door, the one that opened into our laundry room. I moved quietly through the house, checking to make sure it was empty. Lana's car was gone. She'd left for what she claimed was a morning shift at the hospital. I went upstairs to our bedroom and prepared my trap. First, I placed a small digital voice recorder under our bed, the kind used for business meetings. It was voice-activated and had enough memory to record for 12 hours. I tested it to make sure it would pick up conversations from anywhere in the room. Second, I set up a small camera in our walk-in closet. It was a security camera I'd bought online, designed to look like a smoke detector. I positioned it so it would have a clear view of our bed while being virtually invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Third, I turned my phone to airplane mode and found a hiding spot. There was a space under our bed, behind the footboard, where I could lie flat and remain completely hidden. It was uncomfortable, but it gave me a direct view of the bedroom door and most of the room. Then I waited. For 3 hours, I lay under my own bed, listening to the sounds of our house settling, watching dust motes drift through the afternoon sunlight. I started to wonder if I was wrong, if maybe they'd changed their schedule, if this was all an elaborate exercise in paranoia. At 2:15, I heard Lana's key in the front door. My heart started pounding, but I forced myself to remain still. I heard her footsteps in the hallway, heard her talking to someone on the phone. "He's at work until at least 6, she was saying. "We have plenty of time." 5 minutes later, I heard the front door open again. Heavy footsteps this time, definitely male. I heard Lana's voice, cheerful and welcoming. "I was starting to think you'd changed your mind." Traffic was horrible. The voice was unmistakably Hale's. Is he really going to be gone all afternoon? Dean never comes home early. He's too obsessed with his schedules. They were in the living room, directly below me. I could hear every word clearly. I checked the time on my watch and made a mental note. The voice recorder would capture everything, but I wanted my own timeline. "I brought wine," Hale said. "You don't need to get me intoxicated," Lana replied, laughing. "I'm already here. Maybe I need to get myself intoxicated. This still feels weird." "It's only weird if we make it weird. Dean doesn't have to know anything." They moved through the house, and I could track their progress by the sound of their voices. Kitchen first, probably opening the wine, then the living room, where they talked for nearly an hour. I couldn't make out every word from upstairs, but the tone was intimate, familiar. They weren't nervous or guilty. They were comfortable with each other, relaxed in a way that spoke of long practice. At 3:30, I heard them coming upstairs. I pressed myself as flat as possible against the floor under the bed, controlling my breathing, trying to make myself invisible. The bedroom door opened, and I could see their feet as they entered the room. Lana was wearing the expensive heels she claimed were for special occasions at work. Hale was in his work boots, the steel-toed ones he wore at the factory. They stood close together near the foot of the bed, and I could hear them talking in low voices. "Are you sure about this?" Hale asked. "I've been sure for months," Lana replied. "The question is whether you're sure." "I keep thinking about Dean." "What about Dean?" "He's my brother. This is his house, his bed. Dean doesn't pay attention to me anymore. He's married to his job, his schedules, his plans. When was the last time he looked at me like he actually saw me? That doesn't make this right." "Right and wrong aren't the point anymore, Hale. Happy and unhappy are the point. I'm tired of being unhappy." I lay under my own bed, listening to my wife explain to my brother why betraying me was justified, and felt something inside me turn to ice. Not anger, exactly. Something colder and more permanent. They moved around the room, and I heard the sounds of clothes being removed, of shoes being kicked off. The bed creaked as they got on it, directly above me. I closed my eyes and concentrated on breathing silently. on remaining perfectly still. For the next hour, I listened to my wife and my brother in my bed, in my house, discussing their relationship and their plans for the future. Plans that didn't include me except as an obstacle to be managed. "When are you going to tell him?" Hale asked at one point. "I don't know. Maybe never. Why complicate things if we don't have to? You can't stay married to him forever." "Why not? This arrangement works. I get security and stability from Dean, and I get happiness from you. Everyone gets what they need. What if he finds out?" "He won't. Dean sees what he expects to see. He's too trusting to be suspicious." At 4:45, they started getting dressed. I remained motionless, listening to them make plans for their next meeting, watching their feet move around the room as they prepared to leave. "Same time Thursday?" Hale asked. "I'll text you if anything changes," Lana replied. "Use the other phone." I always use the other phone. They left the bedroom together. I heard them go downstairs, heard the front door close twice, first Hale leaving, then Lana 10 minutes later. I waited another 30 minutes before I moved, making sure they were both really gone. When I finally crawled out from under the bed, my entire body was stiff and sore, but my mind was crystal clear. I had everything I needed. I retrieved the voice recorder and the camera, downloading their contents to my laptop. The audio was perfect, capturing every word of their conversation. The video was equally clear, showing both of their faces, documenting their presence in our bedroom. I uploaded everything to a secure cloud storage account, made multiple backup copies, and sent encrypted files to my attorney with instructions to open them only if something happened to me. Then I began the final phase of my plan. The first move was administrative. I documented the exact time of their meeting, the unauthorized use of our house, the violation of trust. I prepared a detailed timeline with supporting evidence, phone records, surveillance photos, audio and video recordings. I contacted our homeowner's insurance company and reported that someone had been using our house without permission while we were away. I didn't mention names, just established a paper trail that would be useful later. I also contacted the building security at our office and reported that someone might be using company access codes for personal activities. Again, no names, just a general concern about security protocols. That evening, Lana came home from her supposed shift at the hospital, acting perfectly normal. She asked about my day, told me about hers, suggested we order Chinese food for dinner. She was relaxed, satisfied, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. "How was work?" I asked, pouring myself a glass of wine. "Busy. We had 3 admissions in the ER and Dr. Martinez was in one of his moods." Dr. Martinez, who I now knew had nothing to do with her afternoon activities. I nodded sympathetically and made appropriate responses, playing the role of the trusting husband for what I knew would be the last time. That night, I lay in our bed, the same bed where she'd been with Hale 6 hours earlier, and finalized my plans. I would give them one more opportunity to incriminate themselves, one final piece of evidence that would make their guilt undeniable. But first, I was going to destroy Hale's career. The next morning, I went to work early and requested a meeting with our head of security. I brought documentation of Hale's access to company systems, his use of company time for personal activities, his violation of the ethical standards required for his security clearance. "I hate to bring this up," I told the security chief, "but I have concerns about my brother's conduct." I presented the evidence methodically, professionally. I showed how Hale had been using his company access codes to enter the building on days when he wasn't scheduled to work, how he'd been making personal calls during work hours, how his recent behavior suggested he might be compromised. "I don't want to cause problems for family," I said, "but the integrity of our security protocols is more important than personal relationships." The security chief was sympathetic but firm. Any violation of security protocols had to be investigated immediately. Hale's access would be suspended pending a full review. By noon, Hale had been called into a meeting with Human Resources. By 2 o'clock, he was suspended without pay. By 4 o'clock, he was cleaning out his desk. I watched from my office window as he loaded his personal belongings into his truck, his face grim and angry. He looked up at the building, and for a moment, I thought he might see me watching. But he just shook his head and drove away. That evening, my phone rang. It was Hale. "Dean, we need to talk." "What about?" "You know what about. This suspension is garbage, and we both know it." "I don't know anything about your suspension, Hale. What happened?" "Someone reported me for security violations. Someone who had access to detailed information about my work schedule and building access." "That sounds serious. Have you done anything that might have triggered an investigation?" There was a long pause. "No," he said finally. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Then I'm sure it will all get sorted out. These things usually do." "Dean, if you're behind this..." "Why would I be behind anything? You're my brother." Another pause. "Yeah, right. I'll talk to you later." He hung up, and I smiled for the first time in months. Phase 1 was complete. Phase 2 began the next morning. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 5 times in 23 years. Instead of going to the office, I prepared for another surveillance operation. This time I wasn't just gathering evidence, I was setting a trap. I followed the same routine as before, leaving the house at my normal time, then circling back and entering through the rear door. I set up the recording equipment, positioned the camera, and found my hiding spot under the bed. But this time, I also prepared a surprise. I left a note on Lana's pillow, written in my handwriting on our personal stationery. It said, "Had to come home sick, went to doctor, back around 4. Love you." I dated it that morning and left it where she would see it immediately upon entering the bedroom. Then I settled in to wait. At 2:20, Lana came home. I heard her moving through the house, heard her come upstairs. She entered the bedroom, and I watched her feet as she approached the bed. She must have seen the note, because she stopped suddenly. "Oh no!" she said aloud. Then, louder, "Hale!" I heard her running downstairs, heard her talking rapidly on the phone. "You can't come over. Dean's sick, he came home early. No, I don't know when he'll be back. We'll have to meet somewhere else." She was quiet for a moment, listening. "The usual place, I guess. Give me 20 minutes. "No, I'm sure he's not here now, but he could come back any time." She hung up and I heard her moving around the house, probably checking to see if I was actually there. She called my name a few times, checked the garage to see if my car was there, even looked in the basement. Satisfied that the house was empty, she went back upstairs to get ready for her meeting with Hale. I watched her feet as she changed clothes, heard her talking to herself as she got ready. "This is getting too complicated," she muttered. "We need to be more careful." She left the house 25 minutes later. I waited another hour to make sure she wasn't coming back, then retrieved my equipment and left. That evening, I returned home at my normal time, acting as if I'd been at work all day. Lana was already there, preparing dinner, acting perfectly normal. "How was your day?" she asked, kissing me on the cheek. "Fine. Busy. How about yours?" "Same as always. Nothing exciting ever happens at the hospital." I nodded and helped her set the table, playing my role in our domestic theater. But inside, I was planning the final act. Over the next week, I put the last pieces of my revenge into place. I consulted with a divorce attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Hendricks, who specialized in high-conflict cases. I showed her my evidence, explained my situation, and asked for her advice. "You have enough to prove adultery 10 times over," she said. "The question is what you want to achieve. Do you want a quick divorce, or do you want to make them pay?" "I want justice," I told her. "Justice can be expensive, for them and for you. Are you sure you want to go that route?" "I'm sure." Patricia prepared divorce papers citing adultery, fraud, and emotional distress. She also prepared a civil lawsuit against Hale for alienation of affection, a legal concept that allowed me to sue him for deliberately interfering with my marriage. It's an old law, she explained, but it's still valid in this state. If you can prove he intentionally seduced your wife, you can hold him financially responsible for the damage to your marriage. I could prove it. I had hours of audio and video evidence of their planning, their coordination, their deliberate deception, but I wanted to catch them one more time in the most damaging way possible. I planned it for a Thursday, their regular meeting day. I took a vacation day from work, but I didn't tell Lana. As far as she knew, I was following my normal schedule. This time, I didn't hide under the bed. Instead, I hid in the guest bedroom across the hall with a clear view of our bedroom door. I wanted to see their faces when they realized they'd been caught. At 2:30, Lana came home. At 2:45, I heard Hale's key in the front door. He had a key to our house. My brother had a key to my house, and he was using it to meet my wife while I was at work. They went upstairs together, talking and laughing. I heard the bedroom door close, heard the bed creak as they got comfortable. I waited 30 minutes, long enough for them to be completely relaxed and off guard. Then I walked across the hall and opened our bedroom door. "Hello, Lana. Hello, Hale." The next few seconds played out like a scene from a movie. Lana screamed and grabbed for the bedsheet. Hale rolled off the bed and reached for his clothes. Both of them were talking at once, trying to explain, trying to make excuses. "Dean, this isn't what it looks like. We were just, it's not what you think." I held up my hand for silence, and surprisingly, they both stopped talking. "It's exactly what I think," I said calmly. "It's exactly what it looks like. And I have evidence of every meeting you've had in this house for the past 3 months. I pulled out my phone and played a short clip of their conversation from the previous week, the one where they discussed their schedule and their plans to continue deceiving me. The color drained from both of their faces. "Get dressed," I told them. "Both of you. Then get out of my house." "Dean, let me explain," Lana started. "There's nothing to explain. I know everything. How long it's been going on, how you've been using our house, how you've been lying to me. I know about the hotel rooms, the prepaid phone, the fake gym membership. I know all of it." Hale was pulling on his clothes, his hands shaking. "Dean, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "Yes, you did. You both did. This didn't happen by accident. You planned it, coordinated it, and executed it. The only thing you didn't plan for was getting caught." I walked to our bedroom window and opened it. "Mrs. Patterson," I called to our neighbor who was working in her garden. "Could you come over here for a minute? I need a witness." Mrs. Patterson, clearly curious about the commotion, hurried over. She arrived just as Lana and Hale were finishing getting dressed. "Mrs. Patterson, I want you to see who was in my house this afternoon while I was supposed to be at work. I want you to remember their faces in case anyone asks you about it later." Mrs. Patterson looked confused but nodded. She'd always liked me, and she clearly sensed that something serious was happening. "Now get out," I told Lana and Hale. "Both of you, and don't come back." Lana tried one more time to talk to me, but I walked away. I heard them leave, heard their cars start, heard them drive away. Mrs. Patterson stayed for a few minutes, asking if I was all right, if I needed anything. "I'm fine," I told her. "Thank you for your help." That evening, I called Patricia Hendricks and told her to file the divorce papers. I also called the police and reported that someone had been using my house without permission while I was at work. I gave them Hale's name and explained that he'd had unauthorized access to my home. The police took a report and said they'd follow up. Having a police report would strengthen my civil case against Hale. Then I sat in my living room, in the house that had been violated by the two people I'd trusted most, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. peace. The lies were over. The pretending was over. The careful planning and patient waiting were over. Now came the reckoning. The next morning, I woke up in my guest bedroom. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bed where I'd caught them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The entire room felt contaminated, like a crime scene that hadn't been properly cleaned. Lana had called 17 times during the night. I'd turned off my phone after the 5th call, but I could see the missed call notifications when I turned it back on. There were also 12 text messages, ranging from desperate apologies to angry accusations that I'd set them up. She was right about that last part. I had set them up, methodically and deliberately. The only regret I had was that it had taken me so long to do it. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd lived for 8 years. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday morning, but I felt like I was seeing it through different eyes. The eyes of a single man instead of a married one. The eyes of someone whose life had just been completely reorganized without his consent. My phone rang. It was Hale. "Dean, we need to talk." "No, we don't." "Yes, we do. You're my brother. We can work this out." "I was your brother yesterday morning. That changed when I found you in my bed with my wife." "It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You made a choice. Now you get to live with the consequences." I hung up and turned off my phone again. I had work to do. The first item on my agenda was changing the locks. I called a locksmith and had him come out that morning. While he worked, I went through the house and collected everything that belonged to Hale. A spare jacket he'd left in our closet, some tools he'd borrowed and never returned, a coffee mug with his company logo. I put it all in a box and left it on the front porch. The second item was securing my finances. I went to our bank and removed Lana's access to our joint accounts. I transferred money to accounts that were in my name only. I changed the passwords on all our shared financial accounts and removed her as an authorized user on our credit cards. The third item was documentation. I spent the afternoon organizing all my evidence into a comprehensive file. Audio recordings, video files, photographs, phone records, bank statements, witness statements from Mrs. Patterson and the locksmith. I made multiple copies and stored them in different locations. The fourth item was communication. I wrote a detailed letter to Lana explaining that I was filing for divorce and that she should contact Patricia Hendricks if she wanted to discuss terms. I had the letter delivered by a process server, along with the divorce papers. I also wrote a letter to Hale, informing him that I was pursuing legal action for alienation of affection and that he should expect to be served with a civil lawsuit within the next few days. The fifth item was strategic planning. I sat down with Patricia and mapped out our approach to the divorce proceedings. "The good news is that you have overwhelming evidence of adultery," she said. "That gives us significant leverage in negotiations. The bad news is that Lana will probably try to claim that the marriage was already over, that you were emotionally distant, that she was justified in seeking affection elsewhere. Can she make that argument stick? She can try. But your evidence shows deliberate deception and planning, not a spontaneous affair born out of marital problems. The recordings of their conversations prove they knew what they were doing was wrong and chose to do it anyway." "What about the civil suit against Hale?" "That's trickier. Alienation of affection cases are harder to win, and the damages are harder to calculate. But given that he's your brother, and that they used your house for their meetings, we have a strong case for intentional infliction of emotional distress." "What kind of damages are we talking about?" "For the divorce, you'll keep most of your assets and she'll get minimal alimony, given the adultery. For the civil case against Hale, we could potentially recover significant damages for emotional distress, loss of consortium, and punitive damages." "How significant?" "Depending on his assets and income, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars." That got my attention. He doesn't have hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then he'll have to find a way to get it. Garnished wages, liquidated assets, payment plans. The court doesn't care where the money comes from, only that the judgment gets satisfied. I liked the sound of that. Hale had destroyed my marriage and my relationship with my brother. It seemed only fair that I should destroy his financial future in return. Over the next week, I watched my carefully laid plans unfold with the precision of a military operation. Lana tried to come back to the house twice. The first time, her key didn't work because I'd changed the locks. She stood on our front porch for 20 minutes, alternately ringing the doorbell and pounding on the door. I watched her through the upstairs window but didn't respond. The second time, she tried to climb through a window. I called the police and had her arrested for trespassing. She spent 6 hours in jail before her sister Jennifer bailed her out. Jennifer called me that evening, furious. "How could you have your own wife arrested?" she demanded. "She's not my wife anymore. The divorce papers were filed 3 days ago." "You can't just throw away 18 years of marriage because of one mistake." "It wasn't one mistake, Jennifer. It was months of deliberate deception and betrayal. And it wasn't just Lana. It was my brother, too. People make mistakes when they're unhappy. Then they should get divorced before they start making those mistakes, not after." Jennifer tried to argue, but I hung up on her. I had no patience for people who wanted to minimize what Lana and Hale had done, who wanted to turn their calculated betrayal into some kind of romantic tragedy. Hale's situation was deteriorating rapidly. His suspension from work had become a termination when the security investigation revealed that he'd been using his company access codes to enter the building on personal time. The official reason was violation of security protocols, but everyone in the company knew the real story. Word spread quickly in our industry. Manufacturing is a small world, and news travels fast when someone loses their security clearance for ethical violations. Within a week, Hale was unemployable in any job that required bonding or security clearance. He called me repeatedly, begging me to help him, to put in a good word with our former employer, to somehow undo the damage I'd caused to his career. "I can't get a job anywhere," he said during one particularly pathetic phone call. "Every company I apply to calls our old employer for a reference, and they tell them about the security violations. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to use your company access to facilitate an affair with my wife." That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened. You used your position of trust to betray me, and now you're facing the consequences. Welcome to the adult world, where actions have results. "Dean, please, I'm your brother." "No, you're not. My brother wouldn't have done what you did." I hung up and blocked his number. I was done listening to his excuses and his pleas for mercy he didn't deserve. The civil lawsuit was served a week later. Hale's reaction was swift and predictable. He hired a lawyer and tried to fight it. His attorney called Patricia to discuss a settlement. "His client is willing to acknowledge that mistakes were made," the lawyer said, "but he disputes the characterization of his actions as intentional alienation of affection." "His client was recorded planning and coordinating an affair with my client's wife," Patricia replied. "He used a key to enter my client's house without permission. He violated his brother's trust in the most fundamental way possible. If that's not intentional alienation of affection, I don't know what is." "What would your client accept as a settlement?" $200,000 plus a written admission of wrongdoing. "That's ridiculous. My client doesn't have that kind of money." "Then he'll have to find it, or we can go to trial and let a jury decide what his actions were worth." Hale's lawyer tried to negotiate, but Patricia held firm. We had the evidence to win at trial, and everyone knew it. The only question was how much a jury would award in damages. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly. Lana had hired her own attorney, a man named Richards, who specialized in protecting wives' interests in high-conflict divorces. But even he couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence we had against her. "My client is willing to accept responsibility for her actions," Richards told Patricia during their first settlement conference. "But she believes she's entitled to a fair division of marital assets and reasonable alimony." "Your client committed adultery with her husband's brother and used the marital home as a meeting place for their affair, Patricia replied. In this state, that affects both asset division and alimony calculations. The marriage was already in trouble. The marriage was in trouble because your client was having an affair, not the other way around. Our evidence shows that she was actively deceiving her husband while he was trying to make the marriage work. What are you looking for in a settlement? My client keeps the house, his retirement accounts, and his investment portfolios. Your client gets her personal belongings and whatever assets she brought into the marriage. No alimony. That's completely unreasonable. That's what happens when you commit adultery in a fault-based divorce state. Your client should have thought about the financial consequences before she decided to cheat. Richards tried to argue for a more favorable settlement, but the evidence was overwhelming. Audio recordings of Lana planning her deception, video evidence of her in our bedroom with Hale, documentation of her lies about work schedules and gym memberships. The most damaging piece of evidence was a recording I'd made of one of their phone conversations, where Lana explicitly discussed her strategy for keeping me unaware of the affair while continuing to benefit from our marriage. Dean is so predictable, she'd said to Hale. As long as I keep up the routine, he'll never suspect anything. He sees what he expects to see. What if he finds out? He won't. And even if he does, what's he going to do? Divorce me? He'd lose half of everything he's worked for. It's not worth it to him. That recording played in Richard's office during our second settlement conference. When it finished, there was complete silence. Your client was wrong about what the divorce would cost my client, Patricia said quietly. And she was wrong about what it was worth to him. Richards looked defeated. What's your final offer? The same as our first offer. She gets her personal belongings and whatever she can prove she brought into the marriage. Everything else stays with my client. She'll never agree to that. Then we'll go to trial, but I should warn you that we have 6 hours of similar recordings. A jury won't be sympathetic to someone who planned and executed this level of deception. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. Lana got her clothes, her jewelry, her car, and $5,000 in cash. I kept everything else. The house, the investments, the retirement accounts, the savings. She also had to pay her own legal fees, which totaled nearly $15,000. The civil case against Hale took longer to resolve, but the outcome was equally satisfying. His attorney eventually convinced him that going to trial would be financial suicide. A jury would hear the recordings of him planning to betray his own brother, see the video evidence of him in my house, listen to testimony about the damage he'd caused to my life. The settlement was for $150,000, paid over 5 years at $30,000 per year. If he missed a payment, the full amount would become due immediately, with interest. Hale didn't have $30,000. He barely had $3,000. He'd been unemployed for 2 months and was working part-time at a hardware store, making $12 an hour. He had to sell his truck, his motorcycle, and most of his possessions to make the first payment. For the ongoing payments, he'd have to find better employment or take on additional jobs. This is going to destroy my life, he told his attorney. You should have thought about that before you destroyed your brother's marriage, the attorney replied. The final piece of my revenge was professional. I made sure that everyone in our industry knew exactly why Hale had been terminated, why he'd lost his security clearance, and why he was unemployable in any position that required trust. I didn't spread rumors or gossip. I simply told the truth when people asked. Hale had violated security protocols to facilitate an affair with his brother's wife. He'd used his position of trust to betray family relationships. He'd demonstrated that his personal desires were more important to him than his professional responsibilities. In an industry built on trust and reliability, that was a career-ending reputation. Within 6 months, Hale had moved to a different state, looking for work in a place where his reputation hadn't preceded him. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was working construction, making barely enough to cover his living expenses and his settlement payments to me. Lana's situation was equally grim. She'd lost her job at the hospital, not officially because of the divorce, but because the stress and legal proceedings had affected her work performance. She'd made several mistakes with patient care, missed shifts, and generally become unreliable. She was living with her sister Jennifer, sleeping on a couch in a one-bedroom apartment, working part-time at a clinic that paid half what she'd been making at the hospital. I heard about their situations through the small network of mutual friends and acquaintances that inevitably connects people who've lived in the same community for years. Some of those friends tried to make me feel guilty about the consequences Lana and Hale were facing. "Don't you think you've punished them enough?" asked Mike, a co-worker who'd known both Hale and me for years. "I haven't punished them at all," I replied. "I've simply stopped protecting them from the consequences of their actions." "But Hale's your brother." "Hale was my brother. The person who betrayed me with my wife isn't my brother anymore. And Lana was your wife for 18 years. Lana was lying to me for at least the last year of our marriage, maybe longer. The person I was married to was a fiction she created to keep me from discovering what she was really doing." Mike shook his head. "I just think you're being pretty harsh." "Mike, let me ask you something. If you came home and found your wife in bed with your brother, what would you do?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know." "I do know. You'd want them to face consequences that match the magnitude of what they'd done to you. You'd want justice, not just for the betrayal, but for all the lies that made the betrayal possible. Maybe, but would you want to destroy their lives?" "I didn't destroy their lives. They destroyed their own lives when they chose to betray someone who trusted them. I just made sure they couldn't avoid the results of that choice." That conversation was typical of many I had during the months following the divorce. People seemed to think I should be more forgiving, more understanding, more willing to move on and let Lana and Hale rebuild their lives. But I wasn't interested in forgiveness. Forgiveness implied that what they'd done was forgivable, and I didn't believe it was. They'd made calculated decisions to betray me, lie to me, and use my trust against me. Those weren't mistakes or momentary lapses in judgment. They were character revelations. The person who forgives a betrayal of that magnitude is really just setting himself up to be betrayed again. Instead of forgiveness, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I threw myself into work, taking on additional responsibilities and longer hours. I renovated the house, replacing furniture and redecorating rooms that reminded me too much of my marriage. I started exercising regularly, something I'd neglected during the stressful months of gathering evidence and planning my revenge. I lost 20 pounds and got into the best shape I'd been in since college. I also began dating, cautiously and selectively. The experience of being systematically deceived by someone I'd trusted completely had made me wary of relationships, but I wasn't ready to spend the rest of my life alone. The first woman I dated seriously was a marketing executive named Lisa Morrison. She worked for a consulting firm downtown, was divorced herself, and had no patience for the kind of games and deception that had characterized my marriage. "I've been through one relationship built on lies," she told me during one of our early conversations. "I'm not interested in another one." "What happened with your marriage?" "My ex-husband was gambling, not just casual betting on football games, but serious gambling. He lost our savings, ran up credit card debt, took out loans against our house. I didn't find out until we were 6 months away from bankruptcy." "How long did that go on?" 3 years, maybe longer. He was very good at hiding it, creating fake bank statements, intercepting mail, making up stories about where money was going." "What did you do when you found out?" "Divorced him immediately, took my name off everything, moved out, started over from scratch. I wasn't going to spend my life paying for his addiction." I liked Lisa's directness, her refusal to make excuses for people who betrayed trust. She understood why I'd responded to Lana and Hale's betrayal the way I had, why forgiveness wasn't an option for me. Some people think betrayal is just a relationship problem that can be solved with counseling and communication. she said. But betrayal is a character problem. People who are capable of that level of deception don't change just because they get caught. Lisa and I dated for 8 months before we moved in together. She sold her apartment and moved into my house, which I'd renovated extensively since the divorce. We talked about marriage, but neither of us was in a hurry to make that commitment again. "I'm happy with what we have," she told me. "I don't need a piece of paper to prove that we're committed to each other." I felt the same way. Marriage, for me, had become associated with deception and betrayal. Living together felt more honest, more based on choice than obligation. Meanwhile, the financial settlements from my divorce and civil suit were providing a steady stream of income. Hale's payments arrived like clockwork every month, $30,000, that served as a regular reminder of the price of betraying family trust. I used the money for investments, home improvements, and travel. Lisa and I took several vacations together, including a month-long trip to Europe that I never could have afforded while I was supporting Lana's lifestyle and lies. The irony wasn't lost on me that Hale's betrayal was funding experiences and opportunities I wouldn't have had otherwise. His monthly payments were giving me a better life than I'd had during my marriage. 2 years after the divorce, I received a call from Jennifer, Lana's sister. "Dean, I think you should know that Lana is in the hospital." "What's wrong with her?" "She had a breakdown. Stress, depression, financial problems. She's been struggling ever since the divorce." "I'm sorry to hear that, but I don't see how it's my problem." "She's family, Dean. You were married for 18 years. She stopped being family when she decided to have an affair with my brother, and those 18 years were built on lies I didn't know about. Don't you feel any responsibility for what happened to her?" "No. I feel responsibility for what happened to me. What happened to her is the result of choices she made. She made one mistake. She made hundreds of mistakes, Jennifer. Every lie she told me was a mistake. Every time she met Hale in our house was a mistake. Every time she chose to continue the affair instead of ending it was a mistake. This wasn't one bad decision. This was a pattern of deception that lasted for months." "She still loves you." "No, she doesn't. She loves the security and lifestyle I provided. If she loved me, she wouldn't have betrayed me." Jennifer tried to convince me to visit Lana in the hospital, to somehow reconcile with her, to help her get back on her feet financially. I declined all of her suggestions. "Lana is an adult," I told her. "She's capable of making her own decisions and living with the consequences. I'm not responsible for fixing her life. What if she does something desperate? Then that will be another choice she makes. I can't control her decisions, and I'm not going to let her use the threat of self-harm to manipulate me." Jennifer was clearly frustrated with my response, but I didn't care. I'd spent 18 years trying to make Lana happy, trying to provide for her, trying to be the husband she claimed to want. The result was that she'd used my efforts as cover for an affair with my brother. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. The call from Jennifer was the last direct contact I had with anyone from Lana's family. I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances. Lana had been released from the hospital, was living in a different city, had found work as a home health aide. But her life and problems were no longer my concern. Hale's monthly payments continued to arrive, along with occasional letters asking me to reduce the settlement amount or extend the payment schedule. I forwarded all of his communications to Patricia, who responded with form letters reminding him that the settlement was legally binding and that any missed payments would trigger immediate collection of the full amount. "He's really struggling," Patricia told me during one of our periodic check-ins. "His attorney says he's working 2 jobs just to make the monthly payments." "Good. Maybe he'll think twice before he betrays someone's trust again." "Don't you think he's learned his lesson?" "I think he's learned that betrayal has consequences. Whether he's learned not to betray people is a different question. The settlement is really impacting his ability to rebuild his life. His betrayal really impacted my ability to trust my wife and my brother. We all have to live with the consequences of our actions. Patricia didn't push the issue further. She understood that the settlement wasn't just about money. It was about justice, accountability, and making sure that Hale's betrayal cost him something significant and lasting. 3 years after the divorce, I married Lisa in a small ceremony at a resort in Colorado. We invited 30 people, close friends, Lisa's family, a few co-workers. No one from my original family was invited. The ceremony was simple, honest, and focused on our commitment to building a life together based on trust and mutual respect. There were no elaborate promises about forever, no romantic fantasies about perfect love, just 2 people who'd been through difficult relationships and were choosing to try again with each other. I promise to be honest with you, I said during my vows, even when the truth is difficult. I promise to earn your trust every day, Lisa replied, and never take it for granted. Those weren't the kind of vows you hear at most weddings, but they were the promises that mattered to us. We'd both learned that love without trust is just an elaborate form of self-deception. Our honeymoon was a 2-week trip to New Zealand, paid for in part by Hale's settlement money. The irony of using his betrayal to fund our celebration wasn't lost on either of us. Do you ever feel guilty about what happened to him? Lisa asked during one of our conversations about my first marriage. No. Do you feel guilty about what happened to your ex-husband when you divorced him? No. He made his choices, and I made mine. Exactly. Guilt implies that I did something wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. I just refused to enable people who were betraying me. Some people would say that revenge is wrong. Some people would say that betraying your brother's trust is wrong. Some people would say that lying to your husband for months is wrong. I'm more concerned with those kinds of wrong than I am with holding people accountable for their actions. Lisa nodded. She understood the difference between revenge and justice, between punishment and consequences. She understood that some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive or forget. As we sat on a beach in New Zealand, watching the sunset and planning our future together, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to that moment. 3 years earlier, I'd been a married man living a lie, trusting people who were systematically betraying me. Now I was married to someone who understood the value of honesty, living a life built on truth rather than deception. The price of that transformation had been high: the loss of my brother, the destruction of my first marriage, the necessity of becoming someone harder and less trusting than I'd been before. But it had been worth it. The peace of living without lies, the satisfaction of holding people accountable for their actions, the joy of building something real with someone who deserved trust. Those were worth more than the comfortable illusions I'd lost. The plan that had broken my old life had also built my new one. And unlike the life I'd lost, this one was built on a foundation that couldn't be shaken by betrayal, because it was built on truth from the beginning. 5 years after catching Lana and Hale in my bedroom, I was sitting in my office reviewing quarterly reports when my secretary buzzed me. "Dean, there's a woman here to see you. She says she's your former sister-in-law." Jennifer. I hadn't spoken to her since the phone call about Lana's hospitalization 3 years earlier. Her showing up at my workplace couldn't be good news. "Send her in." Jennifer looked older than I remembered, worn down by whatever crisis had brought her to my office. She was dressed professionally but cheaply, the kind of business attire you buy at discount stores when you need to look respectable on a limited budget. "Hello, Dean. Thank you for seeing me." "What do you want, Jennifer?" "It's about Lana. She's in trouble." "Lana's been in trouble for 5 years. That's what happens when you destroy your life with poor decisions." "This is different. She's being evicted from her apartment. She lost her job last month, and she can't make rent. She's going to be homeless." I leaned back in my chair and studied Jennifer's face. She was genuinely distressed, which meant this wasn't just another attempt to make me feel guilty about the divorce settlement. "What do you want me to do about it?" "Help her. You were married for 18 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" It meant everything to me. That's why her betrayal was so devastating. Those 18 years were built on lies I didn't know she was telling. She made mistakes. She made choices, calculated, deliberate choices to deceive me while benefiting from my trust and support. Now she's living with the consequences of those choices. Jennifer pulled out a folder and placed it on my desk. She's sick, Dean. Really sick. Depression, anxiety, some kind of autoimmune condition that the doctors think is stress-related. She can barely work, and when she does work, she can barely function. I didn't open the folder. That's unfortunate, but it's not my responsibility. You destroyed her life. No, I didn't. I stopped enabling her after I discovered she was betraying me. There's a difference. The divorce settlement was vindictive. You left her with nothing. I left her with exactly what she deserved based on her actions. In a no-fault divorce state, she would have gotten half of everything regardless of her behavior. In our state, adultery has consequences. She can't survive on what she's making. Then she should have thought about that before she decided to risk her marriage for an affair with my brother. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice becoming more desperate. Dean, I'm begging you. Help her get back on her feet. Give her a loan. Help her find a job, something. She's family. She stopped being family when she chose Hale over me. And speaking of Hale, where is he in all this? If they were so much in love that they were willing to destroy two families, why isn't he helping her? Jennifer's expression darkened. Hale left her 6 months after your divorce was final, said he couldn't handle the stress of the legal problems and the financial pressure. That was interesting. So he abandoned her when the consequences of their affair became inconvenient? He said it wasn't what he thought it would be, that the reality of being together wasn't worth what it had cost both of them. I almost laughed. Let me get this straight. They destroyed my marriage, his career, and both of their relationships with their families for an affair that lasted 6 months after they got what they wanted. It's not funny, Dean. It's hilarious. They gave up everything for something that wasn't even real. They confused excitement and secrecy with love, and when they got caught and had to face the real world, they discovered they didn't actually want to be together. Lana loved you. She still loves you. Lana loved the security I provided and the excitement Hale represented. She wanted both, and she thought she was smart enough to have both without consequences. She was wrong. I stood up and walked to my office window, looking out at the city where I'd rebuilt my life after my marriage collapsed. Jennifer, I'm going to explain something to you that you apparently don't understand. When someone betrays you the way Lana betrayed me, the relationship doesn't just end. It becomes retroactively false. Those 18 years of marriage weren't real, because they were based on lies I didn't know she was telling. That's not true. It is true. Every day she was planning to meet Hale, every lie she told me about where she was going or what she was doing, every time she came home from being with him and pretended to be a faithful wife, all of that was deception. The woman I thought I was married to didn't exist. I turned back to face her. The person who's homeless and sick isn't someone I ever really knew. She's a stranger who wore my wife's face while she was betraying me. Why would I help a stranger who destroyed my life? Jennifer was crying now, which I found manipulative rather than moving. She's desperate, Dean. She has nowhere else to turn. She has the same place everyone else has when they make bad decisions and face consequences. She has herself. She can figure out how to fix her own life. What if she hurts herself? Then that will be another choice she makes. I'm not responsible for managing her emotional reactions to the consequences of her actions. Jennifer gathered up her folder and stood to leave. I thought you might have some compassion left. I have plenty of compassion. I have compassion for people who are suffering through no fault of their own. I have compassion for people who make mistakes and take responsibility for them. Or, I don't have compassion for people who deliberately betray trust and then expect to be rescued from the consequences. She was your wife. She was my wife's impersonator. My actual wife wouldn't have betrayed me with my brother. After Jennifer left, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation. Part of me felt a flicker of something, not sympathy exactly, but recognition of shared humanity. Lana was suffering, and suffering is always unpleasant to contemplate. But the larger part of me felt vindicated. The consequences I'd engineered were working exactly as intended. Lana was learning what it felt like to live without the security and support she'd taken for granted, while she was betraying the person who provided them. That evening, I told Lisa about Jennifer's visit. "How do you feel about it?" she asked. Satisfied mostly. Lana spent months planning and executing a betrayal that she thought wouldn't have consequences. Now she's learning that actions always have consequences, even when you think you're smart enough to avoid them. "Do you feel any urge to help her?" "No. Do you think I should?" Lisa considered the question carefully. "I think you should do whatever feels right to you. But I also think that helping someone who betrayed you that fundamentally would be enabling their belief that they can treat people badly without permanent consequences. That's how I see it too. If I help her now, I'm essentially teaching her that betrayal is a temporary problem rather than a character flaw with lasting results. And you don't want to teach her that lesson. I don't want to teach anyone that lesson. The world has enough people who think they can betray trust and then be forgiven when the consequences become uncomfortable." Lisa nodded. "I agree. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed." 6 months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Lana had moved back in with her parents in a different state. She was working part-time at a medical clinic and living in their basement, trying to rebuild some version of a life from the wreckage of her choices. I felt no satisfaction in her continued struggles, but I also felt no guilt about them. She was an adult who had made adult decisions. Learning to live with the consequences of those decisions was part of being an adult. Hale's situation had stabilized somewhat. He'd found steady work as a construction supervisor in a city 3 states away, making enough to cover his living expenses and his monthly settlement payments to me. His letters asking for reduced payments had stopped coming, which suggested he'd accepted that the financial consequences of his betrayal were permanent. I occasionally wondered if either of them had learned anything meaningful from their experience. Had Lana learned that betraying trust has costs that extend far beyond the end of a relationship? Had Hale learned that family relationships require loyalty and that violating that loyalty destroys more than just the immediate relationship? I doubted it. People who are capable of that level of betrayal usually see themselves as victims of circumstances rather than architects of their own destruction. They learn to avoid getting caught, not to avoid betraying people. But their personal growth, or lack thereof, wasn't my concern. My concern was building a life with Lisa that was based on honesty and mutual respect, and making sure that the people who had betrayed me understood that such betrayals have permanent consequences. In that regard, my plan had been completely successful. Lisa and I celebrated our 2nd wedding anniversary by taking a trip to Japan, funded in part by the investment returns on the settlement money I'd received from Hale. We spent 2 weeks exploring cities, temples, and countryside, talking about our future and the life we were building together. "Do you ever miss being married to Lana?" Lisa asked during one of our conversations. "I miss being married to the person I thought Lana was, but that person never existed. She was a character Lana played to keep me from discovering what she was really doing. Do you think you'll ever be able to trust someone completely again?" "I trust you completely. How do you know I won't betray you the way she did?" "I don't know. But I know that if you do betray me, you'll face consequences that match the magnitude of the betrayal. And I know that you know that too." Lisa smiled. "So your trust is based on deterrence rather than faith?" "My trust is based on evidence and consequences. You've never given me reason to doubt you, and you know that betraying me would cost you everything we've built together. That's a much more reliable foundation than faith. That sounds cynical. It sounds realistic. Faith didn't protect me from Lana's betrayal. Evidence and consequences did protect me from continuing to live in a lie. Do you think that makes you harder to love? It makes me harder to deceive. Whether that makes me harder to love depends on whether someone wants to love me or manipulate me. Lisa reached across the table and took my hand. I want to love you, the real you, not some version of you that I create in my imagination. Then you'll never have the problems Lana had. The real me is exactly who you see. I don't have secret lives or hidden agendas. And if I ever develop secret lives or hidden agendas, then you'll discover that actions have consequences, and that some consequences are permanent. We both understood that this conversation wasn't theoretical. We were establishing the terms of our relationship, the boundaries that would protect us both from the kind of betrayal that had destroyed my first marriage. Unlike my marriage to Lana, which had been built on assumptions and hopes, my marriage to Lisa was built on explicit agreements and mutual understanding. We both knew what we expected from each other, and we both knew what would happen if those expectations were violated. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, but it was honest. And after living through the collapse of a relationship built on lies, I valued honesty more than romance. 7 years after my divorce from Lana, I received a call from an attorney I didn't recognize. Mr. Callix, I'm calling about your former wife, Lana Callix. I understand you were married to her for 18 years. Yes. What about her? She's passed away. I'm handling her estate, and you're mentioned in some of her papers. I sat down heavily in my chair. I hadn't expected to feel anything when Lana died, but the news hit me harder than I'd anticipated. What happened? Natural causes, related to the autoimmune condition she'd been battling. She died in her sleep at her parents' house. Why are you calling me? She left a letter addressed to you. Her parents asked me to contact you and see if you wanted to receive it. I thought about it for a long moment. What could Lana possibly have to say to me after 7 years? What final manipulation or plea for sympathy was waiting in that letter? No, I said finally. I don't want to receive it. Are you sure? It might provide some closure. I got my closure 7 years ago when I divorced her. Whatever she wrote isn't going to change anything that happened between us. I understand. Is there anything you'd like me to tell her parents? Tell them I'm sorry for their loss. I hung up and sat in my office, absorbing the news. Lana was gone. The woman who had shared 18 years of my life, who had betrayed me with someone from my own family, who had spent the last 7 years facing the consequences of her choices. She was no longer here. I felt sad, but not in the way I would have expected. I wasn't sad about losing Lana, because I'd lost her 7 years ago when I discovered her betrayal. I was sad about the waste of it all. The waste of 18 years built on lies. The waste of a marriage that could have been real if she'd chosen honesty over deception. The waste of her final years struggling with consequences that could have been avoided. Most of all, I was sad about the person she could have been if she'd made different choices. The faithful wife, the honest partner, the woman who deserved the trust and support I'd given her. That person had never existed, but her absence felt like a loss anyway. That evening, I told Lisa about the phone call. How do you feel? She asked. Empty, mostly, like closing a book that I stopped reading years ago. Do you regret not taking the letter? No. Whatever she wrote, it was either an apology that came too late to matter or an attempt to make me feel guilty about what happened to her. Either way, I don't need to read it. Do you think what happened to her changes anything? It changes the fact that she's no longer suffering the consequences of her choices, but it doesn't change the choices she made or their impact on everyone else. What about Hale? Will you reach out to him? I thought about that. Hale and Lana had been partners in betraying me, and they'd also been partners in facing the fallout. What happened to her might affect him in ways I couldn't anticipate. "No," I said at last. "Hale made his own choices. If he wants to process what happened to Lana, that's his concern. It doesn't change what he did to me or what he still owes." "The settlement payments?" "They'll continue until everything is paid in full. Obligations don't disappear because circumstances change." Lisa nodded. She understood that my reaction to what happened to Lana was consistent with how I'd always seen her. Accountability mattered more than context, and actions carried consequences that lasted beyond the moment. 2 weeks later, Hale's monthly settlement payment arrived right on schedule. There was no note, no mention of Lana, no request for sympathy or revised terms. Just the payment, exactly as required by our legal agreement. I respected that in a way. Hale was honoring his obligations regardless of his personal situation. It suggested he'd learned something about responsibility, even if he'd learned it too late to repair his relationship with me. A month after everything with Lana, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called the attorney who had handled her estate and asked for her parents' contact information. "I'd like to send them a sympathy card," I told him. "I'm sure they'd appreciate that. They mentioned that you'd been an important part of Lana's life for many years." I wrote a simple card expressing my condolences for their loss and acknowledging that Lana had been an important part of my life for 18 years. I didn't mention the circumstances of our divorce or the reasons for our estrangement. Her parents had lost a daughter, and that loss deserved recognition regardless of what had happened between Lana and me. I also included a check for $5,000, made out to the funeral home to cover any remaining expenses related to her burial. Lisa asked me why I'd done it. Because her parents didn't betray me, they lost a daughter, and they don't deserve to suffer financially because of choices she made years ago? Do you think Lana would have appreciated the gesture? I don't know, and it doesn't matter. I didn't do it for Lana. I did it because it felt like the right thing to do. Even after everything that happened? Especially after everything that happened. The fact that Lana betrayed me doesn't mean I have to become someone who can't recognize other people's legitimate suffering. That small gesture felt like the final chapter in my relationship with Lana. Not forgiveness exactly, but an acknowledgement that what happened to her was separate from her betrayal, and that her parents' grief was separate from my anger. 10 years after catching Lana and Hale in my bedroom, I was a different person, living a different life. I was married to someone who understood the value of honesty, working in a job that utilized my skills and provided financial security, living in a house that held no memories of betrayal or deception. The monthly payments from Hale continued to arrive, a steady reminder of the price of betraying family trust. He had 2 more years of payments remaining, after which our financial relationship would end. Whether our personal relationship would ever be restored was a question I couldn't answer. I thought about him sometimes, wondering if he'd learned anything meaningful from the experience, if he'd become someone capable of loyalty and trustworthiness. I hoped so, for his sake, and for the sake of anyone who might trust him in the future. But I didn't miss him. The brother I'd loved and trusted had been revealed as someone who never really existed, just as the wife I'd loved and trusted had been revealed as an elaborate deception. Missing them would be like missing fictional characters, emotionally pointless and psychologically unhealthy. Instead, I focused on the life I'd built with Lisa, the friends who had proven themselves trustworthy, the work that provided meaning and purpose. I focused on the future rather than the past, on reality rather than illusion. The plan that had broken my old life had given me something more valuable than revenge or justice. It had given me truth. The truth about who people really were, the truth about what relationships really meant, the truth about the importance of consequences for actions. That truth had been painful to learn and expensive to implement, but it had also been liberating. I no longer lived in fear of discovering that my life was built on lies, because my new life was built on verified truth from the beginning. Some people might call that cynical or cold. I called it realistic and sustainable. I'd learned the difference between love and manipulation, between trust and gullibility, between forgiveness and enabling. Most importantly, I'd learned that some boxes are best left unchecked, some plans are best left broken, and some relationships are best left in the past, where they belong. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the house Lisa and I had made our own, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in the final years of my marriage to Lana. Peace. Not the peace of ignorance or denial, but the peace of living authentically with someone who chose truth over comfort, reality over illusion. The plan that broke me had also set me free. Some boxes are best left unchecked,